What's going on, guys? The Comics Kid 2099 here. Welcome to day 283 of the 365-day graphic novel review challenge. Today, I want to talk to you about another Grant Morrison book. This is JLA, New World Order. This is the first 4 issues of the Justice League series that started in 96 or 97, I believe, and this is by Grant Morrison and Howard Porter. There are actually a couple of different ways that you can read this series, obviously back issue hunting. I have these smaller trades. This one is 4 issues. I think the next trade is 4 or 5 issues, but there are newer trades that collect like 2 or 3 of these, so they're quite a bit bigger and thicker, and I know some of the later trades that I have are quite a bit bigger than this one, but there are a couple of different ways that you can read this series if you're interested. The newer ones, I think there's like 3 pretty thick volumes that collect all of Grant Morrison's run, but I don't have those. I have the older collections that collect fewer issues. So today I will be talking about New World Order, and before I can do that, before I can talk about how awesome this series is, I have to talk a little bit about some of the stuff that led up to this. This was the first time in like 15 years that the Justice League comic was the biggest and best superheroes of the DC Universe working together. Going back all the way to like the early 80s, the Justice League had been a bunch of C-listers with 1 or 2 A-listers thrown in there. Justice League Detroit, that was the early 80s before Crisis on Infinite Earths. You had Martian Manhunter and Aquaman. They were the most A-list characters in that particular version of the team, and I like Aquaman, I like Martian Manhunter. I don't know if I would consider either of them A-list compared to characters like Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman. The rest of that team was characters that, frankly, nobody cares about, like Vixen, Gypsy, Vibe, Steel, not John Henry Irons, but another guy calling himself Steel. So that is a version of the Justice League that a lot of people really do not like. And then after Crisis on Infinite Earths, you had the Justice League International by Keith Giffen, J.M. DeMatteis, and Kevin Maguire. And Giffen apparently wanted to do something kind of like this. He wanted to have the Big Seven working together again, because even then it had been a little while since we had that version of the Justice League, and he was basically told no. This was right after Crisis on Infinite Earths. Superman and Wonder Woman were being very heavily retooled. We didn't want to have Superman being redefined, and basically everything is thrown out. We're starting from scratch. John Byrne is trying to figure out who Superman is in relation to the DC Universe, and we don't want to have him doing that with Superman in the solo Superman books, and then Kevin Maguire, Keith Giffen, and J.M. DeMatteis are also working with Superman, and they're doing their own thing with him in the Justice League book. So we were told no on Superman and Wonder Woman showing up in Justice League, so then Giffen, Maguire, and DeMatteis, they decided to use that to their advantage. They were going to take some of these C-list characters that nobody else was using and then turn the series into a sitcom. It's still a superhero series, but it plays on the strength of the writers and the artists using their comedic talents, and it worked really well. That is one of my favorite Justice League runs ever. I really like that a lot, but traditionally, when someone says Justice League, they're not thinking of Booster Gold, Blue Beetle, Fire and Ice, Guy Gardner. They're thinking of these guys right here. And Grant Morrison and Howard Porter, by the time you get to 1996, 1997, they were finally able to turn the Justice League back into something that resembled what people thought of when they thought of the Justice League. Technically, there was like a mini-series that came before this that Mark Waid did, and I don't remember who the artist was who worked with him on that. It was called Midsummer Nightmare, and he basically, I guess, got the team back together in that miniseries, but then whenever you read this, it kind of pretends like that miniseries didn't happen, because these guys are all getting together more or less for the first time. They don't act like they've never met each other or anything like that, but they're acting like this is the first time that they're all working together. But anyway, getting to the story itself, this is a pretty good story. It's a very simple premise. I've talked before about how there are 2 different kinds of Grant Morrison. There's the kind that's got a really simple premise, very easy to understand, with a lot of weird stuff thrown in. This is a very simple premise. The big guns are getting back together, and then there is some really huge, larger-than-life threat that they are going to have to take care of. That's the Justice League. It's not something that Grant Morrison is playing around with too much. But what I like about this is that Grant Morrison is able to restore the concept that the Justice League is a pantheon of almost godlike characters, but at the same time, he is able to play with their humanity a little bit. There's one scene here where Green Lantern is acting really nervous around Wonder Woman, and she says, "You can call me Diana. We're on the same team here. We're in the same league." And he says, "Oh yeah, says you." And that's a really great scene. There's some bickering going on between Wally and Kyle. That's the Flash and Green Lantern, and I really love their relationship in this run. They start off. Wally doesn't really like Kyle because he's very new at this, and Wally, he's been doing this since he was a kid, and so Wally kind of thinks that he's better than Kyle a little bit. But then as you get further into this run, they quickly become almost best friends in the series, and it kind of reminds me of Booster Gold and Blue Beetle, but played a little bit more seriously. Pretty much every character in this story gets something really awesome to do, and that's something that I miss from these Justice League comics from the mid-90s, because looking at pretty much all the Justice League stuff that I don't like as much as I like this run, I look at it and I say, okay, there's a lot of awesome stuff here, but I'm missing some of the humanity, the human aspects that we got to play with here that really made this book shine. Also, the villains here are really great. Grant Morrison was able to create some characters that haven't been ignored and discarded by everyone who followed him. Grant Morrison has this unfortunate habit of creating a character or a concept and introducing it into a series, and then everyone who follows him on that series pretty much ignores what he did. I guess that's not happening as much now as it used to. It seems to me that he used to do that a lot. In New X-Men, he created Cassandra Nova, and then immediately after he left New X-Men, you had people like Chuck Austin and Joss Whedon pretty much ignoring what he did with the character of Cassandra Nova. You had Magdon or Magadon, I guess Mageddon, I'm not really sure how that's pronounced, but that's one of the big villains that shows up later in this series, and that seemed like a perfect character to use as a villain for Superman later on, and nobody has ever used Mageddon except for Grant Morrison in All-Star Superman. So that's something that happens a lot, but in this case, Grant Morrison and Howard Porter create the White Martians, and they are characters who have shown up many times since this run. They have shown up even outside of comics. In Young Justice, they showed up, I think, Miss Martian showed up, and in the comics, she's a White Martian, so technically, yeah, they showed up in Young Justice. But this is one of those rare times, it seems to me, where Grant Morrison works out a concept and introduces it into the DC Universe, and it is not immediately discarded and ignored by everyone who follows him. So that's kind of cool. Really awesome to see new characters and new ideas being introduced into this series. Really, it seems to me, whenever you're doing a Justice League series, it shouldn't be as difficult as what it seems like it is. But pretty much everything over the last 15 years that I've seen from the Justice League just hasn't been what I want whenever I'm reading a Justice League comic. And really, my checklist isn't very big. I want to see the human elements. I want to see these characters and their human personalities interacting with each other. But at the same time, I want to see these characters be very larger than life and do really huge, epic stuff. For example, it's in one of the later volumes, we get to see Superman wrestling with an angel. Stuff like that needs to be par for the course in a Justice League comic. If all of these guys are going to be working together, it needs to be something just really huge and enormous that they cannot possibly handle by themselves. And I think this story definitely does that here with a bunch of White Martians who all have the abilities of Superman or the Martian Manhunter. So a whole bunch of them, that's definitely a huge threat that requires the Justice League to work together. And also, the stories here are very accessible. They're not too weird, too wacky, which is saying something for Grant Morrison. I feel like this run is one of the more timid, tame runs that Grant Morrison has ever done. That's not a bad thing, though. I don't think that you really want to do something as weird and gross and just off-putting as, say, The Filth for a Justice League comic. You want it to be very accessible. You want people to be able to understand what's going on here, and I think that Morrison is able to do that while still working with his strengths as a writer. So I really like this story quite a bit. I like this whole run, but I'll be talking about each volume individually, so that's something that you can look forward to over the next few days. In the meantime, I hope that you guys liked this video. If you did, be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe, and I will be back tomorrow with a different video. In the meantime, you guys have a great rest of your day. Catch you later.